Hi everyone, it's Nicole McGurk for Fawn, and today I have a card featuring the brand new Bugs and Kisses stamp set and dies. This is part of the December Inspiration and Release Week. To start my card, I have stamped a bunch of the cute little bugs from this stamp set on a scrap piece of Nina White Solar cardstock using Memento Tuxedo Black ink. I'm actually stamping quite a few more bugs than I'm going to be using on my card. Some of it just to get a really good stamped impression, since this was the first time I had used the stamp set. And the other reason is my original idea for the card, I kind of switched up mid-card, and ended up really liking what I came up with rather than my original idea. I like to stamp multiples of the images just in the event if I mess something up or I change my mind mid-card like I did here. I don't have to go get the stamp again and ink it up. I'll just have another one right there. That said, if I don't have a mistake or anything, I can always save these images for another card. One of the best things about this Bugs and Kisses stamp set, I think, is how well it works for boy Valentine's or love-themed cards. A lot of times I think it's kind of more of a challenge to find great stamped images that work well for a little bit older boys, not really, like teenagers, but that kind of in-between stage. And this is one that my 9-year-old would really like. I'm coloring in my images with Copic markers. I am going to be using about 3 fireflies, and one good thing about having so many extra images is any of those that maybe weren't perfectly stamped, I can kind of practice a couple of things on to see if I like them before I go ahead and do that to the ones I'll be using on my actual card. I used some shades of blue violet, very light shades, and then some yellows for the fireflies. I wanted the wings to kind of have that iridescent feel. And then I added a little bit of, or a few white dots with my white gel pen to complete those. And once they were on the card, I thought they needed some of the Wink of Stella clear glitter brush marker as well to make them a little sparkly. For my cute little worm, I decided to use some blue violet markers for this as well. These are a little bit more of the gray family, I think, rather than bluish. So they definitely have those shades of violet, but kind of a grayish violet, if that makes sense. And I worked on him until I got the color just how I wanted it. Went back over him a few times. I did color in his little cheek with a little bit of R20 pink for a fun little touch. And he ended up being really cute, I think. I'm coloring in this bumblebee here. I'll probably cut that out now because I actually did not end up using that. And I can save that bumblebee for another card. Now I'm stamping the jar on another scrap of paper, and I decided to color this in, well, having the top of the lid the silver or gray. I'm using some cool gray markers for it, but I will color in the main portion of the jar with some really pretty aqua colors to give that jar just a little bit of tint of color and interest. So I'm just kind of lightly starting and going around my jar and pulling that color in from the sides, just doing little flicking or feathering motions in from each side of the jar to bring that color in just a little bit. I don't want to color the jar solid in this aqua color, but I do want to have just a tint of color. Now, if you get any of those feathering lines and you feel like they're a little too harsh like I did here, go ahead and take your colorless blender and smooth those out. Once that colorless blender dries, it really does help kind of disguise any of those feathering lines and smooths them out. Now I'm going back in with one of my current favorite techniques with Copic markers and adding some dots. This is just a few little dots here and there, almost like bubble glass. Or, you know, sometimes when glass is maybe, sometimes they mean to have it look like bubble glass. Sometimes it's an imperfection in the blown glass. So I just created a few little dots there for interest. Now I have pre-cut a stitched rectangle die from the Fawn Stitched Rectangle collection from some Tim Holtz watercolor paper. And the reason I'm using watercolor paper is because I'm using his Distress inks, and I'm going to flick water on top of this after I get my background colored to add interest to the background. And it works really nicely on the watercolor paper as opposed to other kinds of cardstock. I'm using the Peacock Feathers and Chipped Sapphire Distress inks, and I'm pulling the peacock feathers in from one direction and the chipped sapphire from the other. And I'm working where they meet. I'm just going over that a few times to really smooth that out and get a seamless transition from one color to the next. I really like this combination for night sky. I like it for lots of things, but really love it for night skies. Two of my very favorite Distress ink colors. Now once I have that, I'm taking a paintbrush that I've loaded with some water and just flicking it over the surface. And as that water starts to be absorbed into the watercolor cardstock paper, you can see the ink start wicking away from where I have added the water droplets. Now I am just taking it and really dropping some big droplets here and there. The one there on the bottom is actually a little larger than I wanted, but I didn't worry about it because it's going to be covered up with some grassy borders. So I'm going to color in. I've die cut another stitched rectangle from watercolor paper, and I'm coloring this in with some Mowed Lawn Distress ink. I've die cut that stitched rectangle then with the grassy border. Lawn Fawn die cut, and I cut a border from each long side of that watercolor paper. And I'm not going to distress the grass any. I love the look though. It very much coordinates with the sky since both are colored with Distress inks. Now, once the background was dry, where I flicked that water, I felt like some of them were a little too white, so I'm simply taking my ink blending tool, and without adding any additional ink, I'm just kind of pouncing it over some of those to add a little bit of color back on, and I like how that looks. I'm ready to kind of lay out my pieces that I have stamped and colored and die cut to make sure that they all fit where I want them to go. And this also allows me to see where I want to add my greeting. I've die cut all of the elements using the Coordinating Bugs and Kisses Lawn Cuts dies. I've used a little post-it tape to hold them in place and then ran them through my Big Shot die cutting machine. This is the Wink of Stella Clear Glitter Brush marker that I mentioned earlier. I'm just coloring in the wings of the fireflies to give them a little bit of that glittery iridescent look. And then I will take the powder tool and add that where I want to stamp my greeting. By using the powder tool, you want to make sure that your cardstock background is completely dry first. But this ensures that when you stamp your greeting, I'm using some Versamark ink, that the embossing powder sticks only to where you have actually stamped and doesn't stick to any other part of the background or page. I'll tap off all of that excess, then heat emboss my greeting for a really nice bright white greeting. Now I can go ahead and attach the rest of the elements to my card. I did not do that before I embossed. I have found that sometimes that embossing powder, if there is any adhesive at all sticking out, it will catch on that and I will accidentally heat parts of my card with embossing powder that I didn't really want embossing powder on. So I usually try really hard, if I've kind of pre-planned in my mind what I'm doing with that card, to emboss first and then attach anything with adhesive that needs to be attached to my card. So I'm just speeding through, adding all of these little pieces to my card. I'm using some zig glue pen to attach any of the small pieces and tucking in things in the grass and kind of altering how I position those fireflies just for additional interest. Now I've die cut a mat for my background using another stitched rectangle die from Fawn, and then I will add foam adhesive to the back of that black mat and pop that on a white card base to complete my card. I hope you've enjoyed this video showcasing the brand new Bugs and Kisses stamp set and coordinating lawn cuts dies from Fawn. The supplies I've used are listed and linked below the video on YouTube. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next time.